If you've been told to say he stands ready to meet, I will tell you there's absolutely no evidence because we have not gotten our meeting.
After a war of words over the future of Social Security, sources tell Reuters that an accusation from Republican Senator Bill Cassidy that U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen lied during a Senate Finance Committee hearing on Thursday has obscured behind-the-scenes talks between the White House and lawmakers about how to fund the popular retirement program. Here's the exchange.
Does the president know personally anybody who is dependent upon Social Security, and if their benefits are cut by 24%, they will slide into poverty? It's hard for you to know, so I'll give you a pass on that.
The president knows many people on Social Security.
Then why doesn't the president care?
He cares very deeply.
Then where is his plan?
He stands ready to work with Congress.
That's a lie,
address.
because when a bipartisan group of senators has repeatedly requested to meet with him about social, so that somebody who is a current beneficiary will not see her benefits cut by 24%, we have not heard anything on our request.
The president is committed to Social Security. He stands ready to work with Congress, and he's put on
I'm out of time. I don't mean to be rude, but since I've had multiple
proposals.
requests on a bipartisan basis to meet with him and he's turned everyone down, that rings hollow.
My colleague's out of time, and I would just caution colleagues, we got plenty of differences around here, but accusing witnesses of lying is over the line.
I accept that, and I did not mean that for the Madam Secretary, who is merely saying that which she's been told. I'm saying it for an empiric observation. When the president says he's ready to meet, and he's turned down multiple.
The time of the gentleman's expired, accusing witnesses of lying.
But I did not accuse her.
For several months now, Cassidy and independent Senator Angus King, who caucuses with Democrats, have tried to address Social Security underfunding as approximately 10,000 baby boomers retire every day. Within a decade, tax revenues and a backup dedicated trust fund will be insufficient to meet the payouts for what is often regarded as the most successful program the federal government has administered since its inception in 1935. Central to the bipartisan effort is the possible creation of a second trust fund that for the first time would allow money to be invested in the stock market, though last week's bank failures could give lawmakers second thoughts. While no meetings between the senators and President Joe Biden have been scheduled, a source familiar with the discussion said that White House aides are engaged in talks with the Senate, but the source added that a formalized plan has not been crafted. White House officials did not respond to a request for comment.
The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant on Friday against Russian President Vladimir Putin, an exceedingly rare step for the world body, accusing the Russian president of the war crime of illegally deporting hundreds of children from Ukraine. ICC President Piotr Mansky.
This is an important moment in the process of justice before the ICC. The judges have reviewed the information and evidence submitted by the prosecutor and determined that there are credible allegations against these persons for the alleged crimes. The ICC is doing its part of work. As a court of law, the judges issued arrest warrants. Their execution depends on international cooperation.
Moscow has repeatedly denied accusations that its forces have committed atrocities during its one-year invasion of its neighbor, and branded the court's decision as null and void with respect to Russia. Ukraine applauded the decision by the ICC, with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba tweeting, quote, "Wheels of justice are turning. I applaud the ICC decision to issue arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and Maria Vuvabelova over forcible transfer of Ukrainian children." Ukraine has said more than 16,000 children have been illegally transferred to Russia or Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine. A US-backed report by Yale University researchers last month said Russia had held at least 6,000 Ukrainian children at sites in Crimea, which Moscow annexed from Ukraine in 2014. Neither Russia nor Ukraine are members of the ICC, but Kyiv granted it jurisdiction to prosecute crimes committed on its territory. Putin is only the third world leader to be charged in the history of the ICC, joining former Libyan strongman Muammar Gaddafi and Sudan's Omar al-Bashir. Friday's warrant requires any of the court's 123 member states to arrest Putin and transfer him to The Hague for trial if he sets foot in their territory. But the ICC has no police of its own.
One thing that we should not forget is the fact that no immediate arrest is going to happen.
Eva Vukacic is an historian at Utrecht University.
Putin is not stupid. He's not going to travel abroad to a country where he might be arrested. So in some ways, of course, it is historical. I think it's possibly more likely that it will make him cling to power even more, even though nothing seems to have suggested that he intended to let go of power, right? So I think it's all going to depend basically on what happens with the war and what happens to his regime. I think it's unlikely that there's going to be a significant regime change anytime soon.
Some in Moscow laughed off the accusation.
Putin.
This resident scoffed, "Putin, nobody will arrest him." And in war-weary Kyiv, locals were similarly cynical.
Sure, it's good, but in practice, no one will arrest him, right? Unfortunately, I think that only if he dies will everyone breathe a sigh of relief.
Asked if Putin now feared traveling to countries that recognize the ICC, a Kremlin spokesperson said, quote, "I have nothing to add on this subject. That's all we want to say."
First of all, thanks so much for inviting me to be here.
U.S. President Joe Biden welcomed Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar to the White House on Friday to discuss the recent post-Brexit trade deal for Northern Ireland, support for Ukraine, as well as continued backing of the 1998 Good Friday Peace Agreement. The leaders exchanged greetings in the Oval Office before heading to the U.S. Capitol for lunch with lawmakers from both countries.
Really want to thank you for your help and support and understanding for our position on Brexit in recent years. Really made a difference. Really profoundly want to thank you and America for your leadership in relation to Ukraine.
London and Brussels reached a deal last month to resolve post-Brexit trade tensions with Northern Ireland, which Biden discussed with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in California this week.
I met out in San Diego with the British Prime Minister, and we talked about our commitment to the Windsor Framework. It's a vital, vital step, and it's going to help ensure all the people of Northern Ireland have an opportunity to realize their full potential.
Speaking at the Capitol, Biden spoke with pride about his Irish roots and reaffirmed his support for the Good Friday Agreement, which largely brought an end to political violence in Northern Ireland.
And the history that binds us and the values that unite us.
Earlier this week, Biden said he intended to visit the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland in April for the 25th anniversary of the agreement. Addressing lawmakers at the lunch, Varadkar joked that it was a pleasure to sit next to both the president and House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy, quote, not to keep the peace, but to thank them for their support for Ireland.
French President Emmanuel Macron's decision to reform the country's creaking pension system has ignited a political firestorm. People from all walks of life have taken to the streets to protest against it, in what's become the biggest challenge to Macron's presidency since the Yellow Vest movement. But why is it so unpopular? Despite widespread public opposition, Macron's government used a special procedure to push the bill through the National Assembly without a vote. Most notably, it'll push retirement age back by 2 years. And the French are deeply attached to keeping their retirement age of 62, one of the lowest in OECD countries. The government says the move is vital to avoid the collapse of the country's pension system and ensure younger generations won't carry the burden of financing the baby boomer generation.
Do you want 64-year-old nurses to care for you in the hospital, Mr. Macron?
What I want is to prepare the end of people's careers. What you are touching upon, which is true, is that people have to work a bit longer because they start working a bit later.
The reform could yield about $19 billion in pension contributions to plug the government's funding gap. France has some of the lowest employment rates among 60 to 64-year-olds at 33% compared to its neighbors. In Germany, that rate is 61%, and in Sweden, it's 69%. But the left-wing opposition says that gap could be filled by other means, like taxing the rich and companies more. Opinion polls show a vast majority of voters and trade unions oppose the reforms. More than 1 million people marched through the streets of Paris in mid-January to denounce the plans. Several nationwide protests have taken place since, along with a wave of strikes halting trains, blocking refineries, and curbing power generation.
Les gens en ont marre.
People are fed up. People are exhausted. People see around them that there are plenty of colleagues who don't even make it to the current legal retirement age, so how can we expect them to make it to 64?
While they have been largely peaceful, some have turned violent. After the introduction of the bill in the French National Assembly, protesters set fire in the streets of Paris. Police used tear gas to disperse crowds, and over 300 people were arrested. Macron chose to use special constitutional powers instead of risking lawmakers rejecting the reform. But by doing so, he has given ammunition to the opposition and union leaders who cast the reform as undemocratic.
It's not a victory, but first, it's a defeat for the government.
He has bet his political future on this bill. Failure to reform pensions would tarnish the rest of his second and final term, and stop his reformist zeal dead in its tracks, according to government sources. But it's unclear what he can do now to quell anger on the streets.
The heads of NATO and the European Commission flew to a North Sea platform on Friday to discuss the protection of infrastructure and gas supplies to Europe. After a drop in Russian flows since its invasion of Ukraine, Norway became the largest gas supplier to the EU. Atop the Troll platform, which extracts gas from Norway's biggest gas field, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg spoke of keeping prices stable.
Gas installations like the Troll platform is vital for our economies, for our industries, but also therefore for our security. Because we have seen how President Putin has tried to use energy as a weapon throughout the war against Ukraine. And Norwegian gas has helped to respond to that and ensure that President Putin failed in his attempt to use energy as a weapon.
As Stoltenberg talked, a German Navy ship, a Norwegian Coast Guard vessel, a Norwegian military helicopter and a NATO maritime aircraft were patrolling near the platform, which is situated some 40 miles offshore. Security at Norwegian petroleum installations was increased after the explosions on the Nord Stream pipelines on September 26th in the Baltic Sea, with NATO allies providing military support. In addition, NATO and the EU in January set up a task force to boost the protection of critical infrastructure in response to the Nord Stream explosions. Its first meeting took place on Thursday, von der Leyen said on Friday. The gas from Troll is piped to a processing plant on Norway's west coast before it is piped again to the European Union and Britain. Troll alone covered 11.3% of EU gas consumption last year, operator Equinor said.